Inside today's show, we're going to be talking about the impact of nutrition and lifestyle on PMS and how these factors impact women's cycle health. Because certainly these types of symptoms can be disruptive to everyday life from a women's health perspective, whether it is cramping, bloating, brain fog, maybe even headaches, sometimes increased cravings. All of these things can impact your ability and desire to exercise, as well as maybe even the choices that you're making on a daily basis. And let's, just kind of be straight with it. It's not a ton of fun for women or their partners. So we always want to make sure we have some evidence-based strategies and things we can do to minimize these symptoms and enhance quality of life overall. In working with women in over 15 years in the health, fitness, and nutrition space, the one universal concern is how to optimize cycle health so that it's not necessarily negatively affecting my training, my nutrition, or just overall, daily life, whether it's going to work or having to miss work because of PMS-related symptoms or even PMDD in some cases. Today's episode is mainly going to be about PMS and things we can do from a nutritional perspective to positively impact those things and lessen the symptoms overall. Now, if someone does have pretty severe PMS, this can signal some more severe underlying physiological complications that we need to pay attention to. So if someone is dealing with some form of hormonal imbalance, gut dysbiosis, some of these root causes are really the potential reason why someone's dealing with PMS, but we can look to nutrition to potentially improve and manage some of these symptoms. Specifically looking at diet, a lot of this will get into micronutrients and omega status, so looking at essential fatty acids and the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio and what relationship there might be between that ratio and PMS symptoms. We'll also touch a little bit on food quality, fiber, macronutrients, and a little bit more. Now, you will want to stick around till the very end of this video because I have an important caveat that you guys are going to want to pay attention to. It's probably different than maybe some advice that you've heard before, and I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page with it and able to use it in their daily life or transformation. First, we have to understand that this is a serious topic. There's some sensitivity around it. We have to figure out what's going to work best for you. Now, with that said, we're going to use a combination of research and my personal anecdote as a coach to kind of navigate this situation and understand that there are different drivers, whether it be micronutrient deficiencies, inflammation, hormonal imbalance, that can contribute to PMS. We're going to talk about what we can actually do about it. So first and foremost, let's talk about food quality and just defining food quality. I'm usually talking about single ingredient whole foods. So these single ingredient foods are micronutrient dense. They also contain things like essential amino acids or beneficial antioxidants that are helpful and supportive of health in our overall human dietary intake. Interestingly, ratios of macronutrients are not actually associated with PMS, but food quality does seem to have a very heavy impact. And I would also guess that if we were to dive in and look at research from different angles, things like overall caloric intake, body composition, that may have a relationship as well, just due to the fact that as we move more towards, adding adipose tissue, moving towards metabolic syndrome, we will increase inflammation overall. Inflammation will likely make that PMS worse. But we do have a lot of research on processed food consumption. Now, understand that depending on the journal that you read, the piece of literature or research, the exact definition of processed food may vary, right? So my definition of processed food may be different than what they talk about in research. For just having a generally stated version or generally stated definition for the purposes of today's video and audio, we're talking about processed food being maybe it has multiple ingredients, maybe it's higher in calories, more hyperpalatable, lower in micronutrient density. That's kind of the type of food that we're talking about here. There are obviously foods that could be single ingredient foods that are still technically processed, like you may need to process rice to create a version of rice, or something like cream of rice, which still has one ingredient, or oats are rolled. Technically, there's probably some level of processing there, but we're really talking about more multi-ingredient, hypercaloric, hyperpalatable foods that are probably lower in micronutrient status and lower in essential amino acids. Now, a study by Kwon et al. In 2022 showed that Korean women in the highest 30% of processed food intake and consumption and snacking frequency had much higher risk of PMS than other groups. On the other end of the spectrum, plenty of research shows that types of patterns associated with lower risk. So for example, a Mediterranean diet, this diet, I have an entire podcast episode on if you want to check it out. It's potentially one of the only good named diets. I think there's a lot of fad diets out there with names. The Mediterranean diet or Mediterranean eating style is just based on more how certain parts of the world consume food based on the ingredients they have accessible and just things that have evolved evolved over time to be very popular in the human diet in the Mediterranean region. So it's not so much that we're just picking, okay, this diet has a name, we're going to follow this. It's, okay, what aspects of this diet are helpful or supportive of women's health? Could it be the lean proteins or antioxidant intake, or the quality of fats, or the ratio of fat, having more monounsaturated fats and looking at the ratio of monounsaturates to saturates to polyunsaturates? That's something that's frequently covered in the discussion of the Mediterranean diet. And again, I do have an entire episode on that if you do want to check that out. The Quan research piece, it feels so funny saying the Quan because I feel like it has a lot of pop culture references, but as far as Quan et al. In 2022, the research showed that Korean women with more processed food intake had worse PMS. On the other end of the spectrum, when we look at the Mediterranean diet, when we see more fruits being taken in, more antioxidants, lean protein, fiber, polyphenols, we see a reduction in inflammation and generally improving health outcomes overall. Now, the why here may lie in the induction of inflammation by a Western dietary pattern. And when we say Western eating pattern, we mean things like the standard American diet, or even areas of Western Europe, or places where it's very common to have fast food, multi-ingredient, hypercaloric, low nutrient density foods, but things that are very high in, overall macronutrients and calories. When we look at this, the Western dietary pattern, or the way that people eat in the Western world and what's very common in the United States and North America, is generally speaking a little bit less fiber. Therefore, we have less short chain fatty acids, which are actually beneficial and health promoting for the gut. Short chain fatty acids can suppress and modulate inflammation. We also know that the standard American diet is lower in micronutrients. It also tends to be kind of devoid of antioxidants, and it's full of foods that generate something called oxidative stress. People may also smoke or drink in excess. Those things can also make oxidative stress worse as well, which could potentially make PMS symptoms worse too. Aside from just looking at overall food quality and the ingredients that are contributing to our total calories, we also want to look at micronutrient status and omegas. So with micronutrients, research is actually stronger in the area of micronutrients than it is macronutrients, which is interesting because normally we have a lot of information on calories and macronutrients. But when it comes to cycle health and PMS, there's actually quite a bit of research on micros. So micronutrients are so important because they help to facilitate baseline ovarian function. They provide antioxidant support, and they also help to modulate inflammation, which is going to be important for our overall gut health and immune system. So there's kind of that bidirectional relationship there. The first nutrients we're going to talk about are vitamin D, calcium, and vitamin K2. Vitamin D deficiency is definitely reaching the point of being an epidemic in the Western world, and its importance is huge in terms of physiology. Women with PMS typically have lower calcium intakes or lower blood calcium. These nutrients are grouped together because they work synergistically. So vitamin D3 and vitamin K2 are fat-soluble vitamins. They work together in the body, and they also play an important role in bone formation and bone structure. Calcium is going to be important here too. So when we look at these in research, there are things called meta-analysis, or we basically look at reviews of randomized controlled trials, and it shows when we have these nutrients grouped together, there's less dysmenorrhea, less inflammation, improved antioxidant markers in women with PMS. So really great evidence for those micronutrients there. On top of that, we have magnesium and vitamin B6. So these are grouped together again because of potential synergy in the research, the way that we see them, and they just have a lot of complementary components to them as well. So vitamin B6 is part of the B family of vitamins. It's a water-soluble vitamin. Magnesium is an essential mineral. So we join these together, and when we look at it in research, it's particularly helpful in lowering perceived stress or the overwhelm associated with PMS. So magnesium and B6, very, very helpful from a overall psychological health perspective, emotional health perspective. B6 can also be a helpful and supportive nutrient in managing prolactin, and prolactin can have some pretty negative effects from a women's health perspective when it appears in excess, or when that hormone is very, very high. It can impact our mood, overall drive, motivation, and general function. So when we supplement magnesium and B6 together, definitely helpful from that overwhelm perspective, or if you feel like it's a time when you're experiencing just lower mood and motivation overall. Zinc also shows very powerful effects for PMS. So if we look at a randomized controlled trial, zinc supplementation for 12 weeks among women had a beneficial impact on physical and psychological symptoms of PMS, total antioxidant capacity, and BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a molecule that is implicated in depression and anxiety when it is low. So BDNF, very, very important for overall mental health, and just goes to show that if you normally feel a little bit more sluggish or lethargic during PMS, this is an example of kind of a micronutrient cocktail of sorts that could go a really long way in helping you feel better, right? Because we always want to make sure that we're doing things from a quality of life perspective. And then generally, once we're improving our feelings of well-being and our quality of life, it makes it easier to do the things that we're supposed to do, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's getting the exercise in, making the healthy food choices. But when you feel like crap, it's harder to make those choices, and you just kind of end up in this vicious cycle. So we kind of disrupt the cycle with the nutrients, and we also do some things from a lifestyle perspective and a movement perspective to help manage this overall. Now, next, we're going to talk about omega-3s and the omega-6 to 3 ratio. A high omega-6 to 3 ratio and low omega-3 consumption generally means an increased risk of PMS, or premenstrual syndrome. Many studies showing benefit of supplementation and improvement. Basically, if we add omega-3s, if we add EPA and DHA, omega-3 fatty acids, it seems to improve the symptoms of PMS and just overall improve quality of life. So for example, a systematic review, this was in 2022, had around 1,000 milligrams, or about a gram, of EPA and DHA can improve physical and psychological symptoms of PMS. Now, this is a intervention that will be slower to take effect. It is not going to happen overnight. Most of the research seems to support the idea that it may take 3 to 4 months for that to happen, and that's probably because so many people have skewed omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. So adding 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA, while powerful, may take time to work. So if you're in a situation where you've added fish oil and you've added a very EPA, DHA rich fish oil, you still have not improved those symptoms, give it time. It's not going to be a 7-day fix, not even a 2-week fix. It may actually take 3 to 4 months to basically get to that peak effect and where we have the maximal benefit from the supplement. So as far as, a quick sort of caveat about some of the research that we've had, and something that I kind of promised you guys earlier in the episode, is most of this research on the micronutrients is done in healthy people, and it's also in isolation. So they'll look at something like magnesium and B6. They're not looking at it with also fish oil supplementation, or if there's something on the Mediterranean diet versus the standard American diet, are they also including vitamin D3, K2, EPA, DHA, right? That's not always happening. It's usually a single variable that's being tested, which makes sense from a research perspective. That's how they have to test these things. We can't necessarily figure out if it works if we have 17 different variables going on. So understand but these are not always used in conjunction. So you can supercharge all of these by using them together. So whether it's the micronutrients, antioxidants, modulating inflammation, single ingredient whole foods, improving that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio with a good quality EPA and DHA fish oil, that's moving things in the right direction. What's interesting though is a lot of this research is done on healthy people, not people with hypothyroidism, not people with IBS. It's not necessarily done in issues where people already have metabolic syndrome, but all of these things I just mentioned can have a very serious impact on fertility, women's hormones, and PMS. And a lot of these conditions also have a very strong nutrition and lifestyle connection, right? So if you're someone who maybe has something that I just listed there, you've been diagnosed by a physician to be hypothyroid, or you're experiencing symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, or you're someone who's headed towards metabolic syndrome, you're insulin resistant, or you've been basically been to the doctor and maybe you're pre-diabetic, all of those factors are going to play into PMS. And a lot of this research is not necessarily done on people with those health conditions. So while these things like micronutrients and omega-3s may be very supportive of improving overall women's health and improving cycle health and lessening PMS symptoms, understand that the research is mainly done in healthy people. I would say that when folks have a diagnosis or they're in a compromised state of health, these things become even more important because there's a synergistic relationship between, poor gut health can make the PMS worse. Hormonal imbalance can potentially make, in some instances, it can exacerbate what's going on with the gut health, or low thyroid can slow motility, makes gut health worse, can worsen inflammation. So they're all interconnected. You can't look at these in individual buckets or silos, but it is important to note where the research was done, how it was done, and the population that was included when we're looking at these types of things. So this pretty much wraps up the episode on food and PMS and looking at specific nutrients and how it may impact women's cycle health and the symptoms related to PMS, understanding that certain nutrients are looking more at the mental health perspective, like magnesium and B6 for reducing overwhelm and more of kind of those mental health effects, whereas looking at overall zinc being very powerful because it impacted both physical and physiological symptoms and BDNF, so that also connects to the mental health aspect. And then when we look at vitamin D, calcium, and K2, vitamin D deficiency can impact those PMS symptoms as well. So we have everything ranging from minerals, fat-soluble vitamins, water-soluble vitamins, omega-3 fatty acids. All of these different things seem to improve PMS. Now, looking at the actual food quality when we're talking about antioxidants, polyphenols, fiber, getting in adequate essential amino acids. I will say protein intake is very important too for managing hunger and cravings. If you're someone struggling with PMS, we noticed that processed food consumption and people with the highest snacking frequency in that top 30% had much higher risk of PMS. And that was actually, so this wasn't necessarily a study from the Western world, this was on Korean women, but still understanding that if there's a relationship with the snacking frequency and processed food intake, it just forces us to emphasize the quality of our meals, the ingredients there, and making sure we're getting the appropriate nutrients to improve these symptoms. So if you're someone who works with clients in their transformation, this is going to be something you want to focus on when you're looking at their hormonal health, cycle health, and biofeedback. If you're someone who's just trying to get healthier yourself and improve your quality of life and improve your women's health, cycle health, and PMS, then you're definitely going to want to take these to heart and maybe try one or two of these things from today's episode. Making sure that you have the amount that's right for you, and it is the amount that is studied in the research is usually the best way to go about it. And troubleshooting these things, if you are someone you are a nutrition coach or you're a health and fitness professional, or maybe you are someone who had more conventional education as a dietitian, but you mainly worked in more of like a conventional clinical setting or only related to weight loss, and you've never really approached things related to hormonal health. Some of the more nuanced conversation that goes around women's health and women's hormones takes place inside my core program for coaches and health professionals, which is the Nutrition and Metabolism Specialization. You can learn more about that at metabolismschool.com if you want to check it out. I also typically have loads of free resources for you guys in the podcast show notes if you're listening on audio. If you're watching the video, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a video. Give me a thumbs up or leave a comment on YouTube to kind of support the overall video algorithm there. If you're listening on audio and you haven't yet popped over there and subscribed, make sure you do. But if you're on audio, while you've got that app in front of you, please take 10 seconds and leave a 5-star rating and review. Our audio version of the podcast has been popular for several years now, dating back to 2019. We have over 1 million unique downloads on the podcast. However, not everyone always remembers to leave that rating and review, but I can tell you'll binge the shows because it's reflected in the download stats, but we don't always necessarily have folks who pause, take that 5 to 10 seconds, leave a rating and review, which goes a long way to supporting the work and the research that goes into episodes like this. I have an entire team that goes into gathering the information for these shows and then also the actual production process of editing the shows. So if you find the work that we do helpful, that's a free way that you can basically take a very small amount of your time and really support the work that we're doing. I appreciate you guys tuning in to today's show, all about different nutrients and food and the potential impacts of those things on PMS and women's health. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you in the next show.